The year is 323 BC. The city is Babylon, a place of ancient kings and towering ziggurats. Here, in the grand palace of Nebuchadnezzar II, a legend lies dying. His name is Alexander. He is only 32 years old, yet he has conquered the known world. From the green hills of Macedon to the dusty plains of India, his name is spoken with awe and fear. He is more than a king. He is a force of nature, a whirlwind that has reshaped empires and redrawn the maps of civilization. Now that force is fading, succumbing not to a Persian arrow or an Indian sword, but to a mysterious fever that has gripped his body for days. The air in the chamber is thick with incense and silent dread. His generals, men who have marched with him through scorching deserts and frozen mountains, gather around his bed. They are hardened veterans, titans of war, but now their faces are etched with worry. They look at their leader, the man who seemed invincible, and see a mortal after all. His breath is shallow, his famous energy gone. For 10 days the fever has raged, and with each passing hour the hope for his recovery has dwindled, replaced by a growing sense of uncertainty that chills them more than any winter wind. Outside the palace walls, the city of Babylon hums with a nervous energy. Soldiers from every corner of the vast empire whisper in a dozen different languages. Greeks, Macedonians, Persians, Egyptians. They are all part of this new world Alexander has built. They have followed him, believed in him, and now they wait. They wait for news from the palace, for a sign that their great leader will rise again. But inside, the final moments are drawing near. Alexander's life, a brilliant and violent flame that burned so brightly across the continents, is about to be extinguished, leaving a profound and unsettling darkness in its place. The story of the Hellenistic world does not begin with a triumphant charge or a glorious victory. It begins here, in this quiet, somber room. It begins with an ending. The death of Alexander the Great is the single event that sets the stage for everything that is to come. His vision was of a single, unified empire, a world where Greek and Eastern cultures would blend and create something new. But with his death, that vision becomes a fragile dream. The immense empire he forged with his sword and his will is now like a ship without a captain, adrift on a stormy sea. The moment of truth arrives. The generals, their voices heavy with emotion, ask the dying king a crucial question. To whom does he leave his vast empire? The kingdom stretches from the shores of the Adriatic Sea all the way to the Indus River. It encompasses ancient Egypt, the Persian heartland, and the rugged territories of Central Asia. It is a mosaic of peoples, cultures, and traditions, all held together by the force of one man's personality. Who could possibly hold such a thing together now? The fate of millions, the future of civilization itself, hangs on his final words. Alexander's reply is faint, a whisper that echoes through the silent chamber with the weight of destiny. To the strongest he breathes, kratistoi. The words are simple, yet they are a prophecy of chaos. There is no named successor, no chosen son or trusted regent to take the reins. Instead, he has left a challenge, a contest. He has thrown his empire into the air like a golden apple, for his ambitious and powerful commanders to fight over. It is a recipe not for a smooth transition, but for a long and bitter struggle for power among the very men who had once fought side by side. The generals who hear these words are known to history as the Diadochi, the successors. They are men like Ptolemy, a clever and cautious friend from Alexander's childhood. There is Seleucus, a formidable and ambitious cavalry officer, and there is Antigonid the One-Eyed, an old, grizzled veteran who has never shied away from a fight. These are not men who will simply stand aside. Each one believes he is the strongest, the most deserving heir to Alexander's legacy. They have tasted power, and they have no intention of letting it go. Their loyalty to Alexander was absolute, but their loyalty to each other is about to be tested. As the news of the king's death spreads, a tremor of instability runs through the empire. The glue that held this vast and diverse territory together is gone. Alexander had no legitimate child old enough to rule. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but the future of an unborn heir was uncertain at best. The stage was set not for peace but for conflict. The king's final words were not a solution, but an invitation to war. The men who had conquered the world together would soon turn on one another, each seeking to carve out a kingdom for himself from the body of Alexander's magnificent creation. With Alexander gone, a great question mark hangs over the world. What will become of this unprecedented empire? For over a decade, Alexander's conquests had been the only story that mattered. He had torn down old certainties and created a new reality. He had encouraged his soldiers to marry local women, he had founded new cities bearing his name, and he had begun to blend Greek customs with those of the East. This new, interconnected world was his great project. Now, with the architect gone, would the entire structure collapse into ruin, returning to the fragmented state it was in before? The Hellenistic Age is the answer to that question. It is the story of what happened next. It is the long, complex, and fascinating period that followed Alexander's death, lasting for nearly 300 years. This era was not a simple continuation of Alexander's empire, nor was it a complete collapse. Instead, it was a transformation. The single great empire fractured into several large kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's generals or their descendants. These kingdoms would become great rivals, often at war, but they would also be deeply connected by a shared culture. This shared culture was Hellenism. It was the spread of Greek language, ideas, art, and ways of life across this vast expanse of the world. Greek became the common language of government, trade, and learning, from Alexandria in Egypt to the mountains of modern-day Afghanistan. New cities, built on the Greek model with theatres, gymnasiums, and temples, sprang up across the Middle East. But this was not a one-way street. Greek culture did not simply erase what was there before. Instead, it mixed and mingled with the ancient traditions of Egypt, Persia, and Babylon, creating a vibrant and dynamic new civilization. And so, as we stand at the threshold of this new era, the world holds its breath. The age of one great conqueror is over. The age of his successors, of their kingdoms, and of their shared Hellenistic culture is about to begin. It will be an age of epic wars and brilliant diplomacy, of groundbreaking scientific discoveries and profound philosophical thought. It will be an age of magnificent new cities, incredible art, and the slow, steady rise of a new power in the West Rome. This is the story of the Hellenistic world, a story born from the end of a life, but which would shape the future for centuries to come. Alexander's final words to the strongest echoed in the halls of Babylon like a drumbeat signaling the start of a great and terrible race. The unity he had forged through relentless conquest began to fray almost immediately. His generals, the Diadochi, were men of immense ambition, each carved from the same stone of Macedonian resilience and pride. They were not just soldiers, they were strategists, leaders, and now potential kings. The vast empire, a tapestry woven with threads of countless cultures, was the prize. In the days following Alexander's death, the air in the palace was thick, not just with grief, but with calculation and suspicion. Every glance was measured, every conversation a delicate dance of allegiance and rivalry. The initial problem was one of legitimacy. There was no clear heir. Alexander's wife, Roxana, was pregnant, but the child was yet unborn, its gender unknown. His half-brother, Aridaeus, was mentally unfit to rule. It was a power vacuum of epic proportions. One of the leading generals, Perdiccas, who held Alexander's signet ring, attempted to take control as regent. He proposed they wait for Roxana's child to be born. If it was a boy, he would be king. But the infantry, the backbone of the Macedonian army, distrusted the powerful cavalry commanders. They proclaimed Aridaeus as king, naming him Philip III. A tense compromise was made. A joint kingship between the unborn child and the disabled half-brother, with Perdiccas as the regent pulling the strings. This arrangement was a delicate house of cards, built on a foundation of mutual distrust. The generals, powerful men like Ptolemy, Antigonid, and Lysimachus, had no real intention of serving a regent or an infant king indefinitely. They had spent their lives carving out glory under Alexander, and they now saw an opportunity to rule in their own right. Each man began to quietly consolidate his power, gathering loyal troops and securing the treasuries in the territories under his command. The loyalty that had bound them to Alexander was a powerful force, but it had died with him. Now a new, more dangerous loyalty was emerging, loyalty to oneself. The empire was a living thing, a vast organism with many vital parts. Each general was appointed as a satrap or governor of a specific province. Ptolemy, shrewd and far-sighted, chose the ancient and wealthy land of Egypt. Antigonid took control of the vast territories of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Lysimachus secured Thrace, a strategic region bordering Greece and the Black Sea. These were not meant to be permanent kingdoms, but temporary assignments. Yet everyone knew what they truly were. The starting positions in a grand game for total control. The empire was not yet officially divided, but the seeds of its fracture had been sown. In the immediate aftermath of the crisis, a formal meeting was held in Babylon to divide the immense administrative duties of the empire. This agreement, known as the Partition of Babylon, was an attempt to create a stable framework for governance. It was, a map of power carefully drawn to give each of the main players a significant role, hoping to satisfy their ambitions and prevent immediate conflict. Perdiccas was confirmed as regent of the whole empire, the guardian of the two phantom kings. The other generals were assigned their satrapies, the vast provinces that they would govern in the name of the united empire. It was a grand and hopeful plan on paper. Ptolemy, perhaps the most cunning of them all, secured his position in Egypt. He understood the immense strategic value of this ancient land. It was rich in grain, protected by deserts and the sea, and possessed a long history of centralized, divine rule. From the moment he arrived in Egypt, Ptolemy began to act less like a governor and more like a pharaoh. He respected the local customs, embraced Egyptian religious traditions, and began to build his own independent power base, far from the watchful eyes of the regent Perdiccas in Babylon. He was playing a long game, creating a sanctuary from which he could weather the coming storms. Other generals took their posts across the sprawling domains. Seleucus, who would later become a major figure, was given command of the elite cavalry. Antigonid, Monophthalmus, or the One-Eyed, a veteran of Philip II's time, confirmed his control over the wealthy lands of western Anatolia. These men were giants of their age, hardened by years of constant warfare and political intrigue. They accepted their roles in the new order, but their acceptance was, conditional. They were watching Perdiccas, and they were watching each other, waiting for the first sign of weakness, the first opportunity to expand their own power at the expense of another. The peace was fragile, a thin veneer of cooperation over a deep well of rivalry. The most symbolic act of this period concerned Alexander's body itself. The great king was to be returned to Macedon for burial, but Ptolemy saw a greater opportunity. In a daring move, he hijacked the funeral procession and diverted the body of Alexander to Egypt. He brought the founder of the empire to his own province, housing the golden sarcophagus in Memphis, and later in the new city of Alexandria. This was more than just a sentimental gesture, it was a profound statement of legitimacy. By possessing the body of Alexander, Ptolemy was claiming to be his true successor. This audacious act was a direct challenge to Perdiccas and the supposed unity of the empire. It was the spark that would ignite the first of the great wars. Ptolemy's theft of Alexander's body was an unforgivable insult to the regent Perdiccas. It was a public declaration of defiance, a sign that Ptolemy would not be a mere subordinate. Perdiccas could not let such a challenge go unanswered. If he did, his authority as regent would crumble, and every other general would feel free to ignore his commands. And so, in 321 BC, just 2 years after Alexander's death, the fragile peace shattered. Perdiccas gathered the imperial army and marched on Egypt, determined to punish Ptolemy and reclaim Alexander's remains. The first war of the successors had begun. The dream of a united empire was already dying. The invasion of Egypt was a disaster for Perdiccas. Ptolemy was a skilled defender, and the natural barriers of the Nile proved to be a formidable obstacle. The imperial army, once an unstoppable force under Alexander, struggled to cross the great river. Soldiers drowned, morale plummeted, and the commanders began to question Perdiccas's leadership. They saw him leading them to ruin in a personal feud, while Ptolemy appeared as a wise and stable ruler defending his land. The once loyal army began to turn against its leader. The bonds of camaraderie that had been forged in the campaigns against Persia were dissolving in the muddy waters of the Nile. The breaking point came within Perdiccas's own camp. A group of his senior officers, including the ambitious Seleucus, conspired against him. One night they entered his tent and assassinated him. The regent of the empire, the man who was supposed to hold it all together, was murdered by his own commanders. His death marked the definitive end of any hope for a centralized empire. With the regent gone, the other generals were now truly free agents. The wars were no longer about who would control the empire, but about how the empire would be torn apart. The struggle for succession had entered a new, more brutal phase. In the wake of this chaos, a new settlement was needed. At a conference at Triparadisus in Syria, the victorious generals redivided the spoils. Antipater, the old regent of Macedon, was given supreme command, but he was old, and his authority was limited. Ptolemy's control of Egypt was confirmed. Seleucus was rewarded for his role in the conspiracy with the rich satrapy of Babylonia, the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. Antigonus the One-Eyed was given the task of hunting down the remaining supporters of Perdiccas in Asia Minor. The empire was now a collection of powerful warlords, each ruling their own domain. The age of the Diadochi was truly underway, an era defined by shifting alliances, constant warfare, and the slow, violent birth of new kingdoms from the ashes of Alexander's dream. Of all the kingdoms that emerged from the fractured empire, none shone quite so brightly as Ptolemaic Egypt. At its heart was a city that would become the intellectual and cultural capital of the Hellenistic world, Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great himself at the mouth of the Nile, the city was a masterwork of urban planning. Under the careful guidance of Ptolemy I and his successors, it blossomed into a magnificent metropolis. Its wide, grid-like streets were lined with grand marble buildings, lush public gardens, and bustling marketplaces where goods and people from across the known world converged. It was a city built to impress, a symbol of the new dynasty's power and wealth. Ptolemy I, a canny and intelligent ruler, understood that to build a lasting dynasty he needed more than military might. He needed a capital that would be a center for trade, learning, and culture, a magnet for the brightest minds of the age. Alexandria was perfectly positioned for this role. Its deep harbors could accommodate vast fleets of merchant ships, bringing in wealth from Greece, the Levant, and the wider Mediterranean. This economic prosperity funded the grand projects that would make the city legendary. The Ptolemies poured vast sums of money into constructing temples, a grand royal palace, and, most importantly, the institutions that would secure their place in history, the museum and the great library. The city's population was a vibrant mix of cultures living side by side. A large Greek and Macedonian community formed the ruling and administrative class, bringing their language, laws, and customs with them. They lived alongside the native Egyptian population, who continued their ancient traditions, worshipped their own gods, and spoke their own language. Alexandria was also home to the largest Jewish community in the world at the time, a thriving and influential group that contributed significantly to the city's intellectual life. This blend of peoples created a unique cosmopolitan atmosphere, a melting pot where different ideas and beliefs could interact and create something entirely new and dynamic. Life in Alexandria was a study in contrasts. A Greek citizen might spend his morning at the gymnasium, exercising and discussing philosophy in the Hellenic tradition. In the afternoon, he might walk past a grand temple dedicated to the Egyptian god Serapis, a deity cleverly created by the Ptolemies to appeal to both Greeks and Egyptians. The city was a testament to the Ptolemaic project to rule as Greek kings over an Egyptian kingdom, creating a stable and prosperous state by carefully balancing two great civilizations. Alexandria was the physical embodiment of this vision, a jewel set between the blue of the Mediterranean and the green of the Nile Delta. The true heart of Alexandria was not its palace or its port, but its legendary Great Library. This was not simply a collection of books, it was the most ambitious intellectual project of the ancient world. Founded by Ptolemy I and greatly expanded by his son, Ptolemy II, the library was part of a larger research institution called the Museum, or Shrine of the Muses. The goal was breathtakingly simple and audacious, to collect all the knowledge of the world under one roof. Agents were sent across the Mediterranean and the Near East, with enormous funds to buy or copy every scroll they could find, on every subject imaginable. The scale of the collection was staggering. At its peak, the library was said to contain hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls. Every ship that docked in Alexandria's harbour was searched. Any books found on board were seized and taken to the library. Scribes would make a copy, keeping the original for the collection and returning the copy to the owner. This relentless pursuit of knowledge gathered works of Greek literature, philosophy, and science, but also texts from Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. The plays of Sophocles and Euripides rested alongside treatises on Egyptian medicine and Babylonian astronomy. It was a universal repository of human thought, a place where the past was preserved for the future. The library was more than a warehouse for scrolls. It was a vibrant center of scholarship. The Ptolemies invited the most brilliant scholars, poets and scientists from across the Hellenistic world to live and work in Alexandria. They were given generous salaries, free board and exemption from taxes. Their only task was to study, to write and to think. Here great minds worked to edit and standardize the classic texts of Greek literature, creating the versions of Homer and the great playwrights that we still read today. They wrote commentaries, compiled dictionaries, and debated the finer points of grammar and rhetoric, all in the service of knowledge. This concentration of intellect led to an explosion of scientific and literary progress. It was here that Eratosthenes, the head librarian, calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, using little more than shadows, wells, and simple geometry. It was here that Euclid wrote his Elements, a textbook on geometry that would be used for over 2,000 years. The Library of Alexandria was the engine of Hellenistic discovery, a testament to the Ptolemaic belief in the power of knowledge. It was a beacon of learning that illuminated the ancient world, and its memory continues to inspire us to this day. While Alexandria was a distinctly Greek city, the Ptolemies ruled over the ancient land of Egypt. To maintain control and legitimacy in the eyes of their Egyptian subjects, they performed a careful and fascinating balancing act. For the outside world and for the Greek population, they presented themselves as Hellenistic kings. They spoke Greek, patronized Greek art and culture, and led a powerful Greek-style army and navy. They were the successors to Alexander, champions of Hellenism. But for the Egyptians, they adopted the ancient role of the pharaoh, the divine ruler who maintained cosmic order and acted as the intermediary between the gods and humanity. This dual identity was a masterpiece of political strategy. Ptolemaic kings were crowned in traditional Egyptian ceremonies at Memphis, the ancient religious capital. They took on pharaonic titles and were depicted on temple walls in the classic Egyptian style, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt and making offerings to gods like Horus and Isis. They funded the construction and restoration of magnificent temples throughout the country, such as the grand temples at Edfu and Dendera, which were built in a purely traditional Egyptian architectural style. By showing this deep respect for Egypt's religious traditions, the Ptolemies secured the support of the powerful and conservative Egyptian priesthood. This blending of cultures also created new and unique forms of religious expression. The most famous example is the god Serapis. The Ptolemies created this deity by combining aspects of the Egyptian god of the underworld, Osiris, and the sacred Apis bull, with attributes of Greek gods like Zeus and Hades. Serapis was depicted as a majestic bearded man in the Greek style, but he held Egyptian symbols of power and fertility. This new god was designed to be worshipped by both Greeks and Egyptians, a divine bridge between the two cultures. Great temples, called Serapeums, were built in his honor, most notably a magnificent one in Alexandria that housed a daughter branch of the Great Library. This cultural fusion extended into the administration of the kingdom. While Greek was the official language of the government, many official documents were published in both Greek and Egyptian, written in hieroglyphs and the simpler Demotic script. The famous Rosetta Stone, discovered centuries later, is a prime example of this practice, containing a decree written in these three scripts. The Ptolemies managed to create a unique hybrid civilization. They ruled as foreign pharaohs, preserving the ancient structures of Egyptian society while overlaying them with a vibrant and dynamic Hellenistic culture. This intricate blend allowed their dynasty to endure for nearly 300 years. If the library represented Alexandria's intellectual light, the Lighthouse of Pharos was its physical beacon. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and for good reason. Commissioned by Ptolemy I and completed during the reign of his son, this colossal structure stood on the island of Pharos at the entrance to Alexandria's harbour. It was an engineering marvel, believed to have been one of the tallest man-made structures of its time, second only to the Great Pyramids of Giza. Its purpose was both practical and symbolic, to guide ships safely into the harbour and to stand as an unforgettable monument to the city's power and ingenuity. Constructed from massive blocks of light-colored stone, the tower rose in 3 distinct stages. The lowest section was square, the middle was octagonal, and the top was a slender cylinder. At its very peak, a massive fire burned day and night. The light from this fire was magnified by a large, polished bronze mirror, a technological marvel in itself. It was said that the beam of light could be seen from up to 35 miles away, a welcoming star for sailors navigating the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean. During the day, the smoke from the fire served as a guide, ensuring the tower's usefulness around the clock. The lighthouse was more than just a navigational aid. It was a powerful symbol of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It showcased their wealth, their command of advanced engineering and technology, and their commitment to facilitating trade and connecting Alexandria to the wider world. Just as the library gathered the world's knowledge, the lighthouse guided the world's commerce to the city's shores. It announced to all who approached that they were arriving at a place of immense importance, a center of civilization at the forefront of human achievement. It was a statement of confidence and a promise of safe harbor. For centuries, the Lighthouse of Pharos stood sentinel over Alexandria, surviving numerous earthquakes and the slow decay of time. It was a constant in the life of the city, a landmark known throughout the ancient world. It guided not just merchants and sailors, but also scholars and travelers drawn to the city's fame. Like the library, the lighthouse eventually fell into ruin, its stones toppled by the earth's tremors. Yet, its memory endures as a powerful symbol of the Hellenistic Age, an era of grand ambition, brilliant innovation, and the creation of wonders that could guide and illuminate the world. While Ptolemy was building his stable, compact kingdom along the Nile, another of Alexander's generals, Seleucus, embarked on a far more sprawling and ambitious project. After the chaos following Perdiccas's death, Seleucus secured the ancient and wealthy province of Babylonia. From this heartland in Mesopotamia, he began a campaign of relentless expansion, carving out an empire that would, at its peak, stretch from the shores of the Aegean Sea all the way to the borders of India. This was the Seleucid Empire, the largest and most diverse of all the successor kingdoms. It was, a vast and often unwieldy domain, a patchwork of deserts, mountains, and fertile river valleys. Seleucus I, known as Nicator or the Victor, was a man of boundless energy and vision, much like Alexander himself. He was not content to simply rule a single province. He pushed east, reclaiming the vast territories that Alexander had conquered, but which had begun to slip away after his death. He marched his armies across the Persian plateau and into Central Asia, even crossing the Indus River to campaign in India. There he made a treaty with the great Indian emperor Chandragupta Maurya, trading contested eastern territories for an astonishing force of 500 war elephants. These elephants would become a fearsome and iconic part of the Seleucid military machine. The sheer scale of the Seleucid Empire presented an immense challenge. Unlike Ptolemaic Egypt, which was geographically contained and culturally quite uniform, the Seleucid realm was a mosaic of countless different peoples, languages, and traditions. It encompassed Greeks, Macedonians, Persians, Babylonians, Syrians, Jews, and dozens of other groups. To govern such a diverse population required a different strategy than the one used in Egypt. The Seleucid kings could not simply present themselves as the successors to one ancient tradition. They had to rule over many, balancing the needs and customs of vastly different cultures across an enormous and ever-shifting territory. The heart of the empire was not one city, but two. Seleucus founded a new capital on the Tigris River named Seleucia, which quickly grew into a massive metropolis. But he also established a western capital in Syria, the great city of Antioch on the Orontes. This dual capital system reflected the nature of the empire itself, one foot planted firmly in the ancient Mesopotamian world of the east, and the other in the Hellenistic Mediterranean of the west. The Seleucid kings were constantly on the move between these centers, trying to hold together their immense and restless kingdom, a kingdom of almost endless frontiers and infinite complexity. The primary strategy the Seleucid rulers used to manage their vast and diverse empire was a massive program of colonization and urbanization. Following the example of Alexander, they founded dozens of new cities throughout their domains, from the coast of Syria to the rugged landscapes of modern-day Afghanistan. These cities were typically named after the dynasty's founders, with many called Seleucia, Apamea, or Laodicea, and the most famous Western capital being Antioch. They were designed as bastions of Greek culture in a non-Greek world, built on the classic Hellenistic model with grid-patterned streets, theatres for plays, gymnasiums for exercise and education, and public squares or agoras for political and commercial life. These new cities were settled by Greek and Macedonian soldiers, veterans of the long campaigns, as well as by immigrants from the Greek mainland who were drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. They formed a new ruling class, a network of loyal Greek-speaking communities spread across the empire. These urban centres served as administrative hubs, military garrisons, and centres of commerce, projecting the king's authority into the surrounding countryside. They were islands of Hellenism, in a vast eastern sea, helping to spread the Greek language, laws, and way of life further east than ever before. Greek became the language of government and high culture across this enormous territory. The founding of these cities was not just a political act, it was a profound cultural project. In places like Ai-Khanoum, on the border of modern Afghanistan, archaeologists have uncovered a complete Greek city. It had a grand palace, a gymnasium, and a theatre, with enough seating for thousands of people. Inscriptions found there record Delphic maxims, classic Greek philosophical sayings, carved thousands of miles from Greece itself. This demonstrates the deep commitment of these settlers to maintaining their Hellenic identity, even in the most remote corners of the empire. They were creating a new, expanded Greek world, a world Alexander had dreamed of. However, this spread of Hellenism was not a simple replacement of local cultures. The new Greek cities existed alongside ancient, established Eastern cities, like Babylon. While the Greek elites might live in their new settlements, the vast majority of the population continued to live in their traditional ways. The result was a fascinating and complex interaction. Over time, ideas, artistic styles, and religious beliefs began to flow in both directions. Greek culture changed as it adapted to its new Eastern environment, and Eastern cultures were in turn influenced by the new Hellenistic presence, creating a unique and dynamic cultural landscape across the Seleucid realm. Life within the Seleucid Empire was a constant negotiation between Greek and non-Greek cultures. While the ruling class was Hellenic, the Seleucid kings understood that they could not rule by force alone. They needed the cooperation of local elites and the acceptance of diverse populations. To achieve this, they presented themselves as protectors of local traditions. They supported the ancient Babylonian priesthood and funded traditional cults in Mesopotamian temples, ensuring that age-old religious life could continue undisturbed. This policy of accommodation created a world of multiple identities. A person in Babylonia might speak Aramaic at home, use cuneiform script for religious texts, and then use Greek for official government business. This cultural layering was a hallmark of the Seleucid experience. Unlike Egypt, where Greek and Egyptian worlds were kept separate, the Seleucid Empire saw widespread mixing of peoples. In the great cities, Greeks, Persians, Syrians, and Babylonians lived and worked together, leading to a fusion of customs and ideas. This blending is visible in the art and religion of the period. Official court art was purely Greek in style, but local artists incorporated Hellenistic elements into traditional forms. Greek gods were often identified with local Eastern deities. Zeus might be associated with Babylonian Bel-Marduk, or Apollo with Persian sun god Mithra. This syncretism allowed cultures to find common ground in religious beliefs, creating a shared spiritual language between rulers and ruled. It was a delicate balance, unity without erasing diversity. However, this balance was difficult to maintain across such vast territory. The empire faced constant pressure from multiple threats: the Ptolemies in the west, nomadic peoples in the east, and internal revolts from provinces seeking independence. A famous example was the Maccabean revolt in Judea, sparked by aggressive enforcement of Hellenistic religious practices. The Seleucid Empire was a grand experiment in multicultural governance, a true mosaic of East and West. But its vast size and diversity were both its strength and fatal weakness. While the Ptolemies ruled Egypt and the Seleucids governed a vast Eastern empire, the third major Hellenistic kingdom was forged in the original homeland of Alexander himself, Macedon. This kingdom was secured by the descendants of Antigonus the One-Eyed, one of Alexander's most formidable and ambitious generals. His family line, the Antigonid dynasty, would come to rule over Macedon and exert a powerful, often heavy-handed influence over the city-states of mainland Greece. Unlike the sprawling multicultural empires of the East, the Antigonid kingdom was smaller, more ethnically unified, and deeply rooted in the traditions of its warrior past. Their kingdom was the anchor of the Hellenistic world in Europe. The Antigonids saw themselves as the true heirs to Philip II and Alexander the Great. Their kings ruled from the ancient capital of Pella, the same city where Alexander had been raised. They commanded the formidable Macedonian army, with its famous phalanx of pikemen, which remained one of the most respected fighting forces of the age. Their primary concern was not the administration of diverse peoples in faraway lands, but the direct control of Macedon and the political domination of their proud and often rebellious Greek neighbours to the south. Their rule was more direct, more military-focused, and often more confrontational than that of the other Hellenistic kings. Life under the Antigonids was a continuation of the Macedonian way of life. It was a society built around a strong king, a loyal aristocracy of soldiers, and a sturdy peasantry that provided the manpower for the army. The kings were not distant divine figures like the Ptolemies or the Seleucids. They were warrior kings, expected to lead their armies in person, sharing the dangers and hardships of their men. This created a strong bond between the ruler and the ruled, but it also meant that the kingdom's fate was often tied directly to the military skill and personal charisma of the reigning monarch. The Antigonid kingdom was a tough, martial state, a bastion of old-world Macedonian power. The great challenge for the Antigonids was not managing diversity, but managing the proud and fiercely independent city-states of Greece. Cities like Athens, Sparta, and Corinth had long histories of self-rule and were deeply resentful of Macedonian oversight. The Antigonid kings spent much of their time and resources trying to control these cities, sometimes through diplomacy and alliances, but often by installing garrisons of soldiers in key fortresses like the one overlooking Corinth. This created a constant state of tension, a recurring cycle of rebellion and suppression. The Antigonids were the masters of Macedon, but their hold over Greece was never truly secure. In the shadow of Antigonid power, the old Greek city-states found new ways to preserve their cherished independence. The classical era of single powerful cities like Athens and Sparta was largely over. They were now too small to stand alone against the might of the great Hellenistic kingdoms. In response, they began to band together, forming political and military confederations known as leagues. These leagues allowed the cities to pool their resources, field larger armies, and negotiate with the powerful kings from a position of greater strength. It was a new chapter in the long Greek story of liberty and cooperation. Two of the most important of these confederations were the Aetolian League in central Greece and the Achaean League in the Peloponnese. The Aetolian League was a federation of rural communities and small towns, known for their fierce warriors and effective guerrilla tactics. They became a major power in their own right, often challenging Macedonian control and acting as a disruptive force in Greek politics. The Achaean League, on the other hand, was a more urban federation that included famous cities like Corinth and Sicyon. It developed a sophisticated federal government with a common assembly and elected officials that balanced the autonomy of individual cities with the need for collective action. These leagues represented a significant political innovation. They were an attempt to adapt the classical Greek ideal of the polis, the independent city-state, to a new world dominated by large territorial monarchies. Citizens of a member city were citizens of both their own polis and of the league as a whole. This created a dual identity that allowed for local pride while fostering a broader sense of shared purpose. The leagues fought wars, made treaties, and engaged in complex diplomacy with the Antagonids, Ptolemies, and Seleucids. They were a testament to the enduring Greek spirit of self-determination, a refusal to be simply absorbed into the new imperial order. However, the world of the Greek leagues was one of constant struggle and shifting alliances. The Aetolians and Achaeans were often bitter rivals, fighting each other as fiercely as they fought the Macedonians. Their internal squabbles and competing ambitions often prevented them from presenting a united front. This fragmentation and infighting was a critical weakness. The leagues were powerful enough to resist the Antigonids, but not strong enough to truly defeat them or to create a unified Greek state. This perpetual state of conflict left them vulnerable, and it was a vulnerability that a new rising power from the West would soon learn to exploit with devastating precision. As the Hellenistic kingdoms and the Greek leagues battled for supremacy in the eastern Mediterranean, a new power was steadily growing in the West. On the Italian peninsula, the city of Rome had transformed itself from a modest city-state into the master of Italy. The Romans were a disciplined, pragmatic, and relentlessly expansionist people. They possessed a remarkable talent for organization, engineering, and above all, warfare. Their legions, more flexible and adaptable than the Macedonian phalanx, had proven unstoppable in their conquest of Italy. Now, having secured their home peninsula, the Romans began to look across the sea. The first major clash between Rome and the Hellenistic world came against the Antigonids. Philip V of Macedon, a young and ambitious king, made a fateful decision. He allied himself with Hannibal of Carthage during Rome's desperate struggle in the Second Punic War. This act drew the Romans' attention eastward. Once they had defeated Carthage, they turned their full attention to Macedon, seeking to punish Philip and secure their eastern flank. The resulting conflicts, known as the Macedonian Wars, would change the course of history. The disciplined Roman legions met the famed Macedonian phalanx in a series of decisive battles. At battles like Cynoscephali in 197 BC, the Roman legion proved its superiority. The phalanx was a formidable wall of pikes on flat, open ground, but it was vulnerable and unwieldy on broken terrain. The more flexible Roman maniples could outmaneuver the phalanx, attacking it on its exposed flanks and rear. The defeat of the Antigonid army was a shock to the Hellenistic world. It signaled that a new military and political force had arrived, one that could challenge and defeat the successors of Alexander. Rome, which had once seemed a distant barbarian power, was now the dominant force in the region. Initially, the Romans presented themselves not as conquerors, but as liberators. After defeating Philip V, the Roman general Flamininus famously declared the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games in 196 BC. The Greek cities erupted in joyous celebration, believing they had been freed from Macedonian oppression. But this freedom was an illusion. The Romans had simply replaced the Antigonids as the ultimate arbiters of Greek affairs. They began to intervene more and more, settling disputes, choosing sides in local conflicts, and slowly but surely tightening their grip. The sun was beginning to set on the age of Hellenistic independence. A new Roman era was dawning. The Hellenistic period revolutionized sculpture, moving beyond the idealized calm of the classical era to capture raw human emotion and realism. Artists sculpted figures in dynamic poses, their faces and bodies, alive with feeling like the famous Laocoon and his sons, a scene of agony and struggle. This was art that aimed for emotional truth, not just beauty. Sculptors depicted not only gods and heroes, but also ordinary people. Old fishermen, sleeping children, even drunken women, reflecting the diversity of real life. Wealthy patrons and kings fueled this artistic explosion, commissioning dramatic works for cities like Alexandria and Pergamon. The Pergamon altar, with its frieze of battling gods and giants, epitomizes the era's energy and theatricality. Hellenistic art became a mirror of the human experience, vibrant and deeply personal. The uncertainty of the Hellenistic world inspired new philosophies focused on personal peace. Stoicism, founded by Zeno, taught that while we can't control fate, we can control our reactions, finding tranquility within. Epicureanism, from Epicurus, sought happiness through simple pleasures and freedom from fear, not indulgence. Both philosophies offered guidance for living well in a turbulent age. Cynicism, led by figures like Diogenes, rejected materialism and social conventions, urging a return to virtue and simplicity. These schools challenged people to rethink what truly mattered in life. Hellenistic philosophy became a search for meaning in a changing world. The Hellenistic period was a really special time for science and books, especially at the amazing library in Alexandria. Thinkers like Euclid with his geometry, Archimedes with his cool inventions, and Aristarchus, with his idea that the sun was the center, not Earth, really pushed what we knew. Doctors in Alexandria even learned more about the body by studying human anatomy. Books started to be more about personal thoughts and deep studies. Poets like Callimachus and Theocritus wrote detailed, imaginative poems that helped people escape. And because everyone in the region spoke a common Greek called koine, ideas spread easily. And it even made it possible to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek for the very first time. All this smart thinking really influenced how people in the West and Middle East thought for hundreds of years. So, the spirit of Hellenistic discovery still lives on in science, philosophy, and books today. The brilliance of the Hellenistic world faded as Rome's power grew. Rome gradually absorbed the weakened kingdoms, acting first as arbiter, then as master. The Seleucids, Antigonids, and Pergamon all fell, their independence replaced by Roman control. Local kings became puppets, their autonomy drained by Roman taxes and decrees. The creative rivalries of the Hellenistic courts gave way to subservience. By the 1st century BC, only Ptolemaic Egypt remained independent. A final outpost of Hellenistic grandeur. The age of the successors was ending, overshadowed by Rome. Cleopatra VII, last of the Ptolemies, fought to preserve Egypt's independence as Rome closed in. Fluent in many languages and uniquely skilled, she allied herself with Julius Caesar, securing her throne and bearing him a son. After Caesar's death, she partnered with Mark Antony, sharing both love and ambition to revive Hellenistic power. Their rule from Alexandria challenged Rome, culminating in the donations of Alexandria, a direct affront to Octavian. Octavian's propaganda and military might led to their defeat at Actium. Facing capture, Antony and Cleopatra chose death over humiliation. With their fall and Egypt's annexation, the Hellenistic Age ended. Cleopatra's legacy endures as a symbol of defiance and the era's final spark. With Cleopatra's death, Rome ruled the Mediterranean, but the Hellenistic legacy endured. Greek language and culture became the foundation of the Roman East, influencing art, science, and philosophy. Koine Greek spread Christianity and unified diverse peoples. Roman elites embraced Greek tutors, sculptures, and ideas, preserving Hellenistic achievements. Alexandria and other cities remained vibrant centers of commerce and learning. The innovations of the Hellenistic Age shaped the world for centuries, bridging East and West. Its spirit of creativity and connection still echoes through history.